Hi, I'm Andy. Welcome to my channel. What I want to talk to you about in today's video is something that's literally just been announced. So I'm giving you this information hot off the press. We probably will get more information about what things are happening, the little minutiae of how things will work. But this is the information you need to know right now about what's going to happen to the coronavirus job retention scheme, aka the furlough scheme. Now, I know lots of people are going to be worried about this if they're on furlough or if they're employers and they've got staff on furlough. What happens at the end of October, on the 31st of October, when that scheme finishes? Now, it's been running for nearly 6 months now, and it's gradually sort of winding down. At the start of September, employers had to contribute 10% of the salary, 70% provided by the government. Before that, the full 80% was provided by the government. And in October, it's going to be 60% from the government, 20% from the employer, and then it finishes October the 31st. And there are some industries, some businesses who have never really got back into the run of things, have they? They've struggled to even get going. They're not even allowed to do these things. Think about nightclubs, music venues, all sorts of places, entertainment, wedding venues. There'll be lots and lots of places where people haven't been able to get their staff back to work. And there's going to be a lot of places as well where the income just hasn't returned. They haven't got the money coming in. So they've still got staff furloughed, maybe part-time, maybe completely furloughed, but they haven't got the money coming in to keep them working. And as the restrictions are starting to come back in, we know that they've announced now that we're expecting us at least 6 more months with the virus in our lives, and at least 6 more months where things such as trying to encourage us to work at home, to stay at home more, where pubs and restaurants will shut at 10, other things still not likely to open up again. And football matches, for example, if the league carries on, that is, fans still not allowed back in the stadiums. This is going to go on for a long time. So this October the 31st cut off, for lots of people who's worried about that, could see like kind of cliff edge when suddenly we see a raft of redundancies coming through, lots of pressure on the government. So that's what's happened today. It's kind of just announced yesterday, wasn't expected, a kind of a winter financial statement where they're going to outline some new policies, some new plans. Now, as part of that, they've cancelled the budget, which is due to take place in December. That's not happening now. There will be one in March, but we won't get that kind of broader sense of kind of what the bigger financial plans for the government are. But what we've got in this statement is kind of what's happening right now, in theory, to protect jobs. Now, we all knew it was happening in terms of the coronavirus job retention scheme, that furlough scheme ending, and it has been confirmed, absolutely, that is going to end 31st of October. That scheme is over. In its place is something new, and it is the job support scheme. Now, this is essentially going to work very, very differently to the furlough scheme. It's a wage subsidy. So whereas furlough, you would get that money and you couldn't work, you weren't allowed to work, although it did change later on, you could work part-time and get some of the money. This is only basically designed for viable jobs. That's the quote that Sunak said, viable jobs. And that basically means if you can work, but you can work on reduced hours, the government will pay some of the salary. So it's going to work like this. At least 1/3 of the employee's normal hours have to be worked, okay? At least 1/3. And that has to be paid for by the employer. So at the moment, if you're working part-time, you're working less than that, you'd need to work more, to play part-time from furlough, not on your actual contracted hours, but a minimum third of those hours paid for by your employer. You've then got 2/3 of your hours, okay? This week gets a little bit confusing. 2/3 are left. Of that 2/3, a third of the 2/3 will be paid for by the employer, and a third of the 2/3, second 2/3 of that 2/3, so it gets a bit confusing, paid for by the government, which leaves 1/3 of that remaining 2/3 not paid. You'd see a drop in salary. So for example, if you did work a third of your hours, 33%, you would have 22% of your extra additional part of your salary paid for by your employer, and another 22% paid for by the government, giving you at least 77% of your wages. So you would see a wage cut of 23%, but you'd only be working 33% of your hours. Okay, so does that make sense? It's a bit of a convoluted one, particularly that says with 2/3 of 2/3, which I think was a really bad example of theirs they gave. If someone works, say, 50% of their hours, so just reduced in half what they would normally have, then you're looking at 50% of their hours not worked, and that will be divided again into 3. A third of that, which is 17%, will come from the employer. A third of that will come from the government, which is 17%, giving you a total of 83.3% of your salary you would pay. So the thing about it is, obviously, if this goes ahead, if you are moved on to this new scheme, the job support scheme, you will see a reduction in your salary. Potentially, as at least 77% of your salary. So if you're currently on furlough and you're not working at all, you get 80% of your salary, you'd see a slight drop. Potentially, if you go back and you're working more hours, you might see a slight increase. But even so, it will be a drop. You'll be working shorter hours. And the idea is that essentially that if you've got two people working and you can't afford to pay them both, to have them both working their full hours, rather than make one of them redundant and keep one person working full time, you might be able to keep them both working part time, reduced hours, but again, they're still in their jobs. And again, it's the idea of protecting what he calls viable jobs, which is bad news if you're in one of these industries where you think, there's nothing you can do, the jobs aren't there, the money isn't there to kind of pay you. So that's a really kind of worrying thing for lots of people with this. It's not the same as furlough. It could well signal the fact that if your job can't be brought back part-time, then potentially that redundancy process could be on the cards. There are other things that could happen. Potentially there's unpaid leave that you could be put on. But again, what use is that if you need your money coming in? All that would do is potentially, if things got back to normal and the business you worked for recovered, then maybe you'd be able to get back into the swing of things without having to apply for jobs. But you're still going to have to try and get some income the rest of that time, aren't you? So a few other things it's worth sort of noting with this new job support scheme. We don't know yet whether these reduced hours, the impact that will have on pension contributions or holiday entitlement. You'd imagine that would drop. But again, we don't know. We haven't got all that detail yet. Often these things kind of come in drips and drabs over the coming sort of days, maybe even weeks. Interestingly, employers and employees don't have to be part of the furlough scheme to take advantage of this. So you could have been working all the way through the scheme, not being furloughed at all, but suddenly find that your employer signs you up for this and you're on reduced hours and potentially reduced wages. But it is open to everyone as long as you're a small or medium business. If it's a large business, and they didn't quite clarify exactly what that means by a large business, you have to prove that your turnover has dropped massively to be part of the scheme, whereas previously any business could go with the furlough scheme. So that's the important thing there. If you have been on furlough, of course, that means you might carry on now in this new scheme, or you might go back to work, or you might be made redundant. There's no sort of guarantees either way with that, but you don't have to have been part of that scheme before that. There was something announced in the summer as well, was the job retention bonus, that if someone had been on furlough and you kept them in employment and kept them employed when after furlough ended until January, I think it is, you can use both those two schemes together. So the job support scheme and the job retention bonus. As an employer, you might be able to get both of those. It starts in November for 6 months. Okay, so when furlough ends, this will start. And again, we talk about this carrying on for at least 6 months. That's how long it'll go on for. And he has said, again, we haven't got the details of this, but if you're on this scheme, then you can't be put at risk of redundancy as well. Again, we need more information about that, but your job is essentially protected. I'm not sure practically how that can work if you run out of money and the business closes down, but I guess it's, in the detail, we'll have all the information. So that's the main thing there. Now, obviously, there were lots of things not mentioned. One thing that explicitly wasn't spoken about were the excluded. Back at the beginning, back in March, it was no one be left behind. Now the message was we can't save every single job. The excluded, that kind of 3 million roughly people who are self-employed, fixed-term contracts, limited company directors who haven't got any support during this. Well, they're not getting anything else now. I guess there's a chance potentially if they're a limited company, they might be able to look at the new scheme, but I think it's unlikely if it's based on salary and hours and they don't quite work like that. So they're still excluded. Nothing for those at-risk industries. So particularly that kind of entertainment sort of areas, nothing for them. Again, that word viable job essentially suggests that if government doesn't think it's a viable job, then it's to the dogs. There's nothing they're going to give extra to support people. The self-employed are going to have that income support scheme, those grants, that's going to be extended as well until the end of April 2021, because that's going to be on similar grounds to how this job support scheme will work. So whereas the previous one, again, you're looking at sort of a large chunk of money, now it's down to about 20%, and this is of the average monthly trading profits. And I imagine, again, you've got to sort of declare that you've been affected by COVID in order to get that grant if you are self-employed. And again, there's going to be the same conditions that allow some people to apply for that, but those who work in different ways, part of those excluded, they're not going to be part of it. But 20% of average is roughly on par, I guess, with what the government will be paying people who are in PAYE jobs. What else is important to sort of note here? A few other things. So if you have a business, or again, this could affect whoever you work for. A lot of the time, people they got in the previous time, they got these bounce back loans or coronavirus interruption loans, all this kind of stuff to try and help them with cash flow, give them a bit of money. And there were various terms attached to them to kind of mean they've got 0% interest for a certain amount of time, or low rates of interest to pay back, or deferment for a certain amount of time. They've said that they're going to kind of defer the repayment of these loans from 6 to 10 years for bounce back loans. So they've got longer to pay them back, which also means those monthly payments will reduce, so they'll be cheaper in real terms, in terms of managing your cash flow. They can also make interest only payments and suspend them for up to 6 months if the business is really struggling. Similarly, the business interruption loans, they'd be extended for 10 years. And those schemes are also open to new applicants still. That'd be extended until the end of November. Then there'll be a new scheme in January, a new loan scheme to help businesses with their cash flow. So I guess you might think I don't run a business, I'm not that important. I guess the idea here is they're trying to make it as flexible as possible for people to have the money they do have coming in, if they've got it, to go towards wages. But it's still sort of, the problem is still there. And you think about 10 years time, they're saying we're still going to be paying off these loans in 10 years time, these businesses. Just shows the extent. Like if that's happening for businesses, when they eventually come and ask us to help repay for our taxes, again, it's going to be over a very long time. Even if the virus does go in 6 months, if we get a vaccine and all these things and the stuff reopens and it feels like we're back to normal, we've racked up a lot of debt as a nation. We've got to pay it back. So that's a good indication there. A couple of extra things that were announced today that's worth noting. If you fill in a self-assessment tax return, and that's obviously normally due in January, well, you'll be able to pay that out over 12 months, so 12 smaller payments, so help you spread your own personal costs. And similarly, businesses who deferred VAT already, they'll be able to spread that out as well over 11 payments, rather than having that all due in March when it was sort of delayed from last time, which obviously could be quite a crunch time for people if all of a sudden here's a big amount of cash that they've got to pay it all at once. Help spread it out, hopefully while things recover a little bit. The other thing that's kind of important to let you know, the last thing really, is the VAT cut that was announced in July, or started in July, for the hospitality and tourism industries. Cut it from 20% down to 5%, a 15% cut. That was due to end in the middle of January, and that's now extended until the end of March. Now, what impact that will have on you as a punter, it really depends. Some businesses, they actually sort of pass that on to you, so your prices went down. Others just absorbed it to try and make up for some of the losses they've made. Just means it's going to go on for a little bit longer, hopefully help, again, with cash flow, keep those businesses going a little bit longer if they do decide to keep it, or if they reduce it, get more people through the doors. Well, obviously right now we're being told and try not to do that as much as we can. So there you go. That's a kind of rundown of what's happening. I think it's good in some ways. There are going to be some businesses where this is a huge amount of help and it will keep some people in jobs, but we're still going to see, I think, particularly if you're furloughed right now and you don't see your employer being able to kind of bring you back part-time, or being able to get the money it needs to pay your wages, then it could be a sign that, and sadly, that your job is going to be at risk. Similarly, those people in those kind of industries where it's not clear if you're allowed to, not listen to the radio just now on 5 Live, a nightclub owner was saying, well, we're not allowed to open. We literally can't open the doors. There's no support there. What do you do? So there's some positives there, but also there's some negatives for some people as well. That's what's happening anyway. I've got an article on the blog, which I will link to up here right now and below, and I will keep updating that as we get more information over the coming days and weeks. If you found this useful, please do hit that like button in this video and that subscribe and notification bell as well. Really means the world to me, and it does help other people find these videos. Until next time, cheers. And here are a couple more videos you might find interesting.